Okay, we're on. Welcome everyone to our next Power Talk. Today we're talking next level care. So elevate your practice through customer service. Uh, my name is Damien Adler. I'm one of the co-founders here at Power. I'm a psychologist by trade. I'm the head of customer success here at Power. And my background prior to this, for those who may not be familiar, but got into this space as a psychologist and building a large private psychology practice um, with my wife. So customer service in health is something that's always been very important. And part of that sort of success journey that we've had both with the clinic, but also with Power. Now, with me today, I'm very lucky to have Diana Golden, who actually heads up our customer success team here at Power. Welcome, Diana. How are you?
Hi, Damien. So great to be here. Yep, I'm Diana Golden. I've been with Power Diary just over a year now, and I have been working in customer service, specifically in the healthcare field, for over 20 years. Half of that career was with in-home care management. So I've been working with patients in home and then also virtually. So
Yeah,
I'm really happy to be here.
yeah. And in-home management, that's a fairly sort of intense mode of delivery for health services, right? So it's often the customer service element, both, I guess, managing customers and managing, you know, practitioners' experiences as well is significant.
Absolutely. It's a whole different level. Getting your care managers ready to go in home, a lot of privacy, safety concerns. So there's a lot of moving pieces with in-home care.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very good. So yeah, Dan, as you're saying, you've been here now just over a year, and I think the obviously you were a natural fit for the role because of that background, right, in healthcare and all the rest of it. But in the time that you've been with us, right, you've really kind of moved the needle on our customer success. And I think, in fact, I can make a public confession here that prior to you, I was managing directly the team members, and I can certainly say that the team metrics in all regards have improved further since you've taken over. So you're running the team and that element of the business better than I ever did. So that's why I'm very excited, like, to have you on this, because I think that the experience and I think we think alike on some of these things, and I think that the insights that you've got and how you achieve good sort of customer success and good customer service. I think the way that you kind of go about it, it aligns with some of the things that we found in private practice as well. And so, really excited to have you on here and to be able to sort of share share the experience that you have with our audience. Okay, without further ado, we'll just sort of jump into the kind of why element of this. So, what are the key things here? Like, I guess on one hand, we know customer service is important, but why sort of specifically, what difference, does it kind of make? Why should we, put this extra attention onto this?
Well, I think that, you need to maintain a good customer support team so you can maintain customers, right? You
Mhm.
have to have that retention of your customer base. You need to get the referral too.
Yeah.
You have to have that team that's friendly and approachable, make sure that they're trained properly. You've got to have a real differentiation in your team as well. So you've
Mhm.
got different people, different skill sets. Um, it's a skill to build a team, right? And to get the
Yeah.
right people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think often, the customer, whether it's an administrative person in a practice or it's in another context, but the customer service or that reception or admin person is typically the first or the one of the first sort of real contacts they have with the business, right? So we're thinking in a
Absolutely. They're the
practice.
face. They're the
Yeah,
face of your business. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, the face and the voice, isn't it? That they ring up and someone patient rings up with inquiry that it's going to set the tone for the rest of the really the rest of the interaction.
Well, and in today's world, it's the face, the voice, the written, the everything. They have to communicate in so many different ways that your team or your main admin employee really has to have all these skills.
Yeah, yeah, which is not always easy to find in one
No.
in one person. It's a very demanding role. Okay, so the way that we're going to go through this, we actually talked about a few different ways of breaking down, customer service, and
Mhm.
what we settled on is really looking at like the 5 sort of most common mistakes that we see, and that will sort of allow us to kind of focus in on those things that really kind of move the needle on whether on customer service, whatever the context, but for health, practices, it's really about that the initial contact and then the follow through the entire sort of client journey that each interaction they have. So we're going to cover the 5 most common sort of or biggest customer sort of service mistakes, and we'll just have a discussion about each of those and share some of the thoughts on that. Okay, so first up, we're talking about empathy and the role of empathy. And mistake number 1 is a lack of empathy. What does that look like in a customer? Like, what sort of things do you see there, and why is this so important?
Well, I think that, I think most people want to hire a team member or a person that has empathy as their primary.
Mhm.
They want to be compassionate. They need to understand the customer. They need to have empathy. Um, Sometimes in the customer support role, there's a lack of empathy because there's some repetition with the role. Um, Everybody has good days and bad days, but you have to have that consistent empathy for what your customer is going through,
Mhm.
especially in healthcare. You never know what's happening on the other end of the phone, on the other end of the email,
Yeah.
for both the practitioners and patients, customers. So your team member really has to have an understanding of what's happening on the other side,
Mhm.
and really give the care that they need to, and have a deep understanding and empathy.
Yeah.
But there's a balance there, right? Because
Yeah.
you can't have too much. um, as business owners, as business managers, you need to be sure that you're running your business successfully.
Yeah.
So the balance here is a balance of being empathetic, but not
Mhm.
being too empathetic that the business isn't successful.
Yeah.
You'll find this sometimes when it comes to finances, right?
Yeah.
If it's, a refund is potentially available and it's really not appropriate, you really have to find that balance of knowing when to say yes and when to
Yeah.
do what's right for the business.
That's
Yeah.
right. And I think in practices, the way that plays out in health practices, it's things like enforcing no-show policies and fees.
Mhm.
It's chasing up unpaid invoices. It's sort of that ability to be empathetic but assertive enough to um, often safeguard the clinician's time, because
Mhm.
if there's a patient, for instance, who may be sort of insisting on an urgent appointment and maybe it's not available or maybe it's not appropriate, like in the
Right.
context of that, but having someone that has the empathy to kind of relate to and understand where that sort of patient or client might be coming from, but at the
Mhm.
same time be confident enough and assertive enough to be able to sort of push back in a gentle, appropriate kind of way, but nonetheless firm, that kind of reinforces the policies of the practice. And I think this is something that it took us a while to get right. Like in our
Mhm.
so my wife and I started a psychology practice, initially just her and I, and then we grew it into this large, multi practitioner practice. And so with that, we sort of learned a lot along the way about admin and what to hire in terms of that support. So initially, we fell into the trap, which I think a lot of practitioners and practice owners may do, which is um, just focusing on that empathy, right? So someone who's
Right.
warm and has the traditional great customer service skills, but really, you're sort of prioritizing empathy because as a practitioner, people will instinctively know, of course, that that's important. But then when it comes to some of those other things, like being able to be assertive and safeguard
Right.
and manage the financial side of things of ensuring that we do follow up and we get invoices paid and whatnot. That it really is this kind of, you can almost like go from one extreme, and then the risk is to kind of go the other way and get someone who's like really assertive,
Right.
really
Exactly.
confident, but like it's not really actually. You stand back and look at the big picture, is not necessarily the right way to go. And so trying to find that kind of balance in between where someone has those kind of skills and has that capacity, and it's not not common, right? Like it's a hard
No.
ask to find someone that has those combination, but nonetheless,
Right.
sort of certainly important. Yeah. Um, in smaller teams, I think a point that we could make about this balance, that if you've got one admin person, say in a practice,
Mhm.
then naturally you're looking for someone that has those characteristics um, within that one person. But if you've got a larger team, sometimes I think, and we've seen this done successfully, and we certainly did it in our practice. Sometimes you can get people that with slightly different sort of emphasis. Like some might be more on the empathetic side, some might be more on the assertive side, and you can allocate jobs and tasks to match their personality and match that skill set. So if you can't get
Absolutely.
balance within a team, or let's say you've already got a few people employed, and you're not going to the areas or the performance issues or whatever with this. It's not so much that to the extreme that you would necessarily rehire, or but let's say you want to correct the balance. You could look within your team and say, well, which way do people naturally lean, right? And then
Absolutely.
allocate the task appropriately, so you've got a better fit for those. If you've got people that are more assertive, and are more forthright, then getting them on those tricky but important aspects. So to do with money and other areas that they may that might come into potential conflict. Then allocating those makes sense, right?
Right.
And similarly, the people that might have a lean towards empathy and not so much the assertiveness, then sometimes there's a whole bunch of jobs that are really good for that person to do. And it may be in some cases working with or being the primary contact for patients that might be particularly sensitive or really require that extra level of empathy. Then it's great to kind of pair them up and have them as the kind of main person dealing with the administration of that that
Right.
account, or that
And I
person.
mean, that's really, and we'll talk about this, but that's really knowing and understanding your team, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Really taking the time to learn their strengths
Yeah,
and understand them each
and
and as an
understand.
individual team member. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump into mistake number two,
I think
which
I
is
led you right into that one. That was a
you sure did. That was a really, really smooth segue that you achieved for us there. Okay, so not listening to clients. Okay, so how does this break down? So what should people do instead? And what happens if you don't listen to your clients?
Well, there's different bullets here. So obviously, we need to listen to our customers, get their feedback, whether it be feedback regarding the team member, their experience, feedback regarding the product or service. We need to listen and take as much feedback as we can from our customers.
Mhm.
The bullet here, we talk about listening to understand, and that's a little bit what I was speaking to about getting to know your team member. And it's the same getting to know your customer, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people feel like they're listening,
Mhm.
but listening to understand is a completely different concept.
Mhm.
Really taking the time to listen to your customer, listen to your team members, make sure you're understanding the ask
Mhm.
and you're able to, get back to them and tell them the why,
Mhm.
right? There's the
Yeah.
ask and there's the why. So it's
Yeah.
that back and forth.
Yeah. And so if we're thinking about this, listen to understand, what's the counter position of that? What trap do people fall into, do you think? If they're not listening to understand, what do you tend to find they're doing?
They're listening to respond, right?
Right. Right.
You're many times people are listening and they have their response in their mind, and instead of really understanding the full picture and getting all the pieces,
Yeah.
they're ready to respond.
Yeah.
And you'll see that sometimes with customer support, customer service responses, is they know the answer that they've been giving, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of times, like I mentioned before, it's a repetitive response, But if you really take the time to listen to each request and
Yeah.
listen to understand, you'll find that there may be something different. And
Yeah.
usually there is something a little bit different with each request.
Yeah.
So don't jump in with a response that you know. Take the time to understand the
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in practices, we certainly sort of see this, that needing to kind of listen intently to what the patient is saying or what the client is saying
Mhm.
on the phone about whatever it might be that they're interacting with the admin team about. But and let's say, for instance, let's say your books are full, right? Or
Mhm.
there's a long kind of wait. In a practice context, the admin person may be quite used to now saying we're booked out for 3 months or something, right? If that
Right.
was the case. Now, so that's that kind of repetitive element. But so, listening to respond, if someone is asking, a patient rings up, client rings up, they're asking for an appointment, right? And, if the admin person is already at that point of, oh, we're full for 3 months, I know what I'm going to say here, right?
Mhm.
They're essentially just sort of waiting for the person to finish talking to kind of give them the reply, because I think, well, whatever you're saying now is not really that relevant, because the answer is, unfortunately, we're booked out for 3 months, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, and then with that, you get from the subjective experience of the patient isn't good, right? Because they, even though the answer is the same, it they don't feel like they've actually been listened to, and that the admin person has understood what their particular circumstances are, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
that's the thing, isn't it? At that point, like, it's a very, even though the outcome may be the same, that not listening, not sort of like tuning out and getting ready to reply, it really impacts the experience of that patient and that perception of whether you care or not as an organization.
Exactly. And that's that third bullet there, which is the thoughtful response.
Yeah.
So you need to take the time to, if you've taken the time to listen to understand, you should be able to summarize and respond thoughtfully and
Right. So summarize, you mean summarize their view, right? Like what they're saying to
summarize
you?
their view
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your own view. So
Yeah.
you should, and we're talking about this, over several minutes, and most of the time this would have to happen quite quickly, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to come up with your response and listen quickly and respond quickly. And that's also a skill, to be
Yes.
able to thoughtfully hear someone speak for just a minute, or quickly read an email and respond,
Yeah.
and being able to summarize, understand, and again, from our other slide, having that empathy
Yeah.
that you need, the correct level of empathy in your thoughtful response.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then it leaves then the patient or the customer with that sense that, a sense, I they understand me, and I also know why, if the answer is they can't get what they want, for instance, and that, I understand why that isn't the case, or why that is, so let's say it's about, um, that example I was using before of someone who their practice has got a 3 month wait, and to say, look, I hear and understand that, you're in a bad way at the moment, or that would like some urgent treatment or an urgent appointment, and then explain, unfortunately, this is that situation where we're booked up, to this point, and then that thoughtfully, like, there's a few options here. We can book you in that time and try and get you in on a cancellation appointment, but I understand you might be in pain, or maybe if it's psychologically related, maybe it's something urgent in that regard. But I hear from what you were saying that you need more urgent treatment. Here are some other options that you might like to consider. And
Exactly.
it's kind of
Right.
putting that kind of context, putting that sort of thoughtful, linking back what you're saying to their particular circumstances. Versus if you said, "Look, we're busy for." We're busy for the next 3 months. Sorry, can't see you. I can put you on a wait list if you like, and then send some standard email with some contacts of urgent emergency services. Right? Like, it would feel very factory-like and very uncared for. Very, that they weren't really heard.
Yeah. And I think that some of this may seem very obvious, but these are skills, skills that you have
Yeah,
to look for in your team
yeah,
members. in your admin staff that they understand how important what may seem obvious is there's training involved, there's skill involved, there's reinforcement involved, and that's how you'll retain your customer base. That's how you'll get those referrals, is by that voice reassuring your customer that they're doing everything they can to make that appointment happen, or whatever the service is.
And I think the thing to remember on that too, like sometimes we get, truly unreasonable requests, right? Like, right? So, okay. And so it's easy to kind of be feel justified in the kind of response. And also, I think even as practice owners or practice managers, like the admin person is debriefing, with us, and we, you get that kind of reaction of like, that was an unreasonable request, right? Like what, right? It's easy to get in the same headspace, right? Of the, let's say, the sort of blunt, non-empathetic reply was given, right? So, and it can feel like that's justified, even the practice managers, practice owners. But the thing to remember, right, is that person, their subjective experience, the patient that is, they don't know they made an unreasonable request, for one, right? So in their mind, most people think they're reasonable, right? Like that's one of the amazing things. But no one gets around, thinking that they're being unreasonable in their views and their behavior and whatnot. So they think that they're reasonable. Therefore, the lack of empathy, like they're going to just detect that as lack of empathy. They're not going to say I was being unreasonable. They're going to say they didn't care about my situation, right?
Exactly.
And then the third thing is that they're going to go around and they're going to spread that negative experience, right? Without the context that you have on it, right? What they're going to hear when they go back to their doctor or their specialist or to their friend, whoever referred them or whatever their network is, they're not going to say, hey, I made an unreasonable request and they said no, right? They're going to present it, of course, what their real experience is from their point of view. So, and they'll say, well, I was really urgently in need of care, and they just said, no, they couldn't help me, right? That's going to be the summary. And, those people they're talking to have no reason, like, not to believe that, right? So, so the issue is the damage that does, even if you just zoom right in and say, well, on that interaction, yes, that was a bit blunt, but, that person was being unreasonable. It's still not an excuse, right? And that's where, like, customer service as a profession, viewing it, it is, like you said, a skill. And to be able to maintain that despite the fact there's repetitive elements to the role, deliver that message in a way that's meaningful and shows that empathy and shows that listening is vital. And you just can't get around it. Like, it's because the consequence of not will happen whether or not, like, that's out of your hands. Once that's occurred, the subjective experience of that patient or that customer in our case is what it is. They will share that view.
Right. That's right.
And okay, let's jump on. Let's move to mistake number 3. There's always a slight lag when I press the button, but there it is. Okay. Okay. So failing to train here. So what's the issue? Like, what what sort of assumptions do we make at the start, do you think, or risk making when it comes to customer support?
So one of my favorite assumptions is that when you hire someone, that they understand phone etiquette, right? You make the assumption that people understand how you should answer the phone, what you should be saying to customers. Sometimes there's also in the written word, people use emojis all the time now, and you should never make the assumption that a team member or an employee knows when it's the right time or the wrong time to be using those emojis, when is the right time and the wrong time to be casual on the phone. So you should never make assumptions that what is, the way that you would behave on the phone, that is how your team member will as well. I mean, making assumptions, you can't do it for anything, really. You can't make assumptions.
It applies across everything, doesn't it?
Right,
So, and if you think about, like, even just a term, if I said, like, what's good customer service, right? What does that look like in practice? What's the behaviors of that? If we probably asked 10 different people, we'd probably get like a whole bunch of different responses that don't necessarily. So, but again, because we all think we're reasonable, like us as the interviewer interviewing like a candidate for an admin role, reception role, or a customer support role, like if we have in our head, oh, well, it just makes sense. It's good customer service is what it is. Everyone knows that, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not necessarily the
Yeah,
case.
you never know. I mean, you have to assume that you need to train
Yeah,
your team member
yeah,
on everything,
yeah,
everything that's important to you.
yeah,
And sometimes it may seem silly to say this is the exact script that we use when we answer the phone,
yeah,
or this is the exact way that we want our signatures to look on our
yeah,
responses. But you should never make an assumption and train on everything that's important to you. And that's a great point that you make, Damien, because every practice, every company has different
yeah.
aspects of their business that are important to them. It's not
Yes,
going to be the same for everyone. So
yes,
you need to train on what's important to you
yeah,
and not make
yeah.
assumptions.
That's right.
Mm.
And often
Yeah.
too, the like a person will carry over from their previous workplace. So someone's got 5 years or 10 years of customer support or customer service or medical admin, health admin, and you almost sort of it amplifies the assumption. Sometimes you think,
Right.
yeah, okay, I know, like, right, and they do a great reference check the whole lot, but what they did at their previous organization may be very different to what you think is acceptable.
Exactly.
Right? And
Yeah.
and I think we've all experienced that, right? Where sometimes it's a culture in an organization that they have things that you just think, how did that become acceptable? So people bring all that unconsciously with them to the role, not knowing that that isn't aligned. So getting in there, training. If there's inconsistency, and this is something that both in our health practice, but also in Power Diary, that if there's inconsistency in the responses that they get, it
Mhm.
erodes the kind of like trust, doesn't it? And the confidence that people kind of have in the service you're providing. So if there's that, if you ring up a health practice and you get very different responses, messages, tone, styles,
Mhm.
um, then you sort of become uncertain, about,
Right.
yeah. And yeah, do,
And
do
that's
you,
where training comes in, right? Everyone needs to be on the same page. Everybody should be trained on every aspect of the organization, right? So
yeah,
especially your customer team,
yeah,
because the customer team touches everything.
yes,
So you may not need to be a subject matter expert on every aspect of the organization, but you
yeah,
do need to know a little bit about everything that's happening
yeah,
so that when your customer reaches out, you're able to give a very clear response.
yeah,
In our environment, we have a lot of changes, great things happening, big changes to make our product better.
yeah,
But as the product grows, our customer team needs to know each aspect of the product that's changing, and how to relay that in a simple way to our
yeah,
customers.
yeah,
So it's a lot of training, and it has to happen every day.
yeah,
It's not something that you can say, okay, we're going to get together once a quarter or once a month and talk about the changes or talk about training. It's continuously, reviewing responses, reviewing
mhm,
phone calls,
yeah,
meeting with the team, letting them know the changes that are happening. It's communication,
yeah, yeah,
and that will eliminate that erosion of trust.
yeah, absolutely. And I think in a health context, health practice context, that sort of continual sort of training, I think it looks slightly different, but it's the same concept. Like it's about having regular check-ins with the admin team, and so
Mhm.
sometimes weekly, sometimes fortnightly or 2 weekly, sometimes monthly, but that no more than that, right? And in that, reviewing what went well over that period of time, anything that didn't go so well, so difficult phone calls, issues with chasing invoices, interactions that didn't turn out the way we would have liked, anything like that. Um, and so within a health practice, then that's a constant evolution of learning from those things, like doing a little bit of a, like, how'd that go? How did you feel? How could we handle that differently, etc. And then capturing that, and in fact, all the kind of training, all the expectations in some sort of manual or reference sort of, material, so that training and that standard is available. And back when we, started the practice, we used to keep those training materials in all sorts of places. Sometimes it'd be on Google Docs, sometimes it'd be Word, sometimes Dropbox, had them all over the place. And we found that was really sort of, it was even hard to know what is the current live version that we are using, and it was one of the sort of reasons that we noticed this across lots of health practices. And in Powder, we built the practice manual, right? So every account has a practice manual built in. We have a whole bunch of preloaded templates that you can use, so you don't have to start from scratch. But you can edit and capture these sorts of things, these expectations about like a customer service and the tone you want and any scripts that you use and so forth, captured all in the manual within Powder. And again, it's to help with that consistency, make sure that information is available, everywhere.
Absolutely.
Wherever that is needed, wherever they're providing services. So, the other one is that we want to, I think, talk about here is about clients should know what to expect. This is something that we found that if there's inconsistency, let's say in a practice, and maybe you have a process, they ring up, they have a new patient, you might send out, you take the initial booking on the phone, then you might send out an online form, for them to complete. Maybe you send them out some information about your client portal and how they can book online and pay online and things like that if you're using that feature. But you might have a process where you're introducing them to the practice. On the phone, you tell them, let's say you've got one admin person that tells them correctly these things, right? But if you don't have training across, or there isn't consistency in how it's done, then no one actually sends those things, or activates ticks in Power to say to send that stuff off. Then trust erosion is very quick, because they've had an expectation set and then it wasn't actually delivered, right? And if a patient turns up to a practice and they didn't receive any of the paperwork that they were supposed to, and nothing happened, it was a different, then all of a sudden they lose confidence, not just in the administrative side of it, but also in the delivery of the healthcare, which means that the practitioner, before they've even had any interaction at all, can end up sort of behind, with the client, that they've kind of got to make up some ground because the client's already kind of feeling a little bit off and lost that kind of trust and confidence. And so, setting expectations with clients and then reinforcing those, being very consistent, you get that kind of benefit of, being, having that consistency, having that trust, and ultimately it leads to good outcomes,
Absolutely. And that building of trust and the consistency is also the concept of training your customer, right? So you spend a lot of time training your internal staff, but we talk about, let's look at Starbucks, for instance, and how trained all of us are to speak their language, order the mocha, the venti mocha skinny, latte, just the way they want us to. We speak their language. So, in our environment, it's exactly what you're saying, training the customer to follow the processes that you want them to follow. Being sure that they understand your cancellation policy, being sure that they understand all the expectations that you've put in place for your team member to get to them, that your customer is also trained on those policies and practices.
Absolutely. And because they and some people get a little upset, like when we talk about training a customer, or they find it, but it's you use whatever terminology you like, but ultimately, their customers are learning from us all the time based on the interaction, right? So if they cancel an appointment with an hour's notice, and the admin person doesn't follow whatever the procedure is for that, to sort of talk to them about the late cancellation, to follow through on a charge if that's the policy. Well, we have just trained the customer. If we skip all that, we've just trained them to say, don't worry about what the policy that we sent out to you at the very start and that you signed, or the notice we have in the waiting room. You can ring up and just cancel, and that's fine. We won't even ask you a question. We won't even raise any of these sort of slightly awkward topics with you, right? We're training our customers all the time. And, sometimes, and that's where like that if we lose sight of that, you kind of wonder why some practices will have stats that are out of whack, right? Like their
Mhm.
no-show rates and their unpaid debtors, the outstanding accounts they have. So many things you can, it becomes evident in a way that can really impact on the business.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
you really can't you just can't underestimate the importance of that consistency and that idea that we are training our customers constantly.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to mistake number 4. There we
Okay.
go. So not being proactive. What are we looking at here? What's the issue?
Well, I think you need to really understand, and this feeds into some of our previous slides, listening to understand, really training your staff. So if you don't understand the pain points of your
Mhm.
customers ahead of time, you're not going to be able to give them the right response, and you're not going to be able to give them the service that they're really looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what? And in that scenario, if you were, um, they're kind of there's going to be like surprises all the way in a way, isn't it? If we're not sort of proactively thinking about and managing these kinds of things for the customer's experience of that, it's going to feel pretty bumpy.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, again, it's about consistency, it's about communication, understanding like we say here, the pain points that they may hit along the road,
Yeah.
and having an answer ready,
Yeah.
and training your team members on the response for these pain points,
Yeah.
features that may help with these different pain points that your customers are experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's yeah. I think it's sometimes it's kind of a subtle one, and sometimes something we don't sort of do in the I guess the busyness of like setting up practices and getting everything up and running. There's so many things to kind of think about, but mapping that client journey and understanding
Mhm.
where those pain points might be, and then reinforcing, I think, the message um, multiple times in multiple ways. So if there are, sometimes I think they might send out like an online form, which is great, and it can, the person consents to treatment, they understand that, blah blah blah, right? That's great. But if that is sort of really the only time you really emphasize, or try and address those pain points, then it'll likely be forgotten, right? And
Right.
whilst it was still important to do from a legal, ethical point of view, in practice it makes little difference, right? So having like, I guess, looking at that client journey, being proactive and thinking about those things, and then reinforcing the messages in different ways. So if we were thinking about the importance of attending appointments and giving adequate notice, right? Yes, okay, in the engagement component of that with health practices, they're going to have something that goes out that talks about that. But then reinforcing that with explanations maybe in the waiting room about why it's important, what a positive
Mhm.
difference it makes to the practice when everyone attends there. I'm thinking then having the same sort of script or the same type of messaging if there's an interaction with the customer or or the admin team about it. Then that hearing it from multiple ways it then will likely seep in and get into and set the genuine expectation, rather than I did it once,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And and then we sort of almost feel justified, like, well, if you go back and look at your when you first signed your patient form, it did say that you need to give us 48 hours or whatever it might be, right? Like,
Right.
and feel quite sort of righteous about that, right? Like, no, it is there, and um, and that might be technically true, but it won't make a meaningful difference unless we find different ways of kind of reinforcing that and getting that kind of that consistency, and then people know what to expect. They've got those expectations, and it also means that your team don't end up, because these issues have been anticipated and there might be training on it or a script on it or a process at least to follow, then they're not feeling like they're sort of caught out and having to make things up on the spot. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
So, having those responses ready, But it's also, so this is client pain points, but also, your team. The client pain point is going to also be your team's pain point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So again, this all feeds into previous slides, like I said before. So if you're proactive and understanding what these potential issues may be in advance, then you're able to train, you're able to give them that balance of empathy, you're able to give them the tools they need, and
yeah,
then your expectations can be managed, right? That's one of my favorite things to say is manage expectations and management of expectations, because you cannot expect your team to respond and behave in the way that we've discussed in previous slides
yeah,
unless you understand the pain points that they have to resolve and the pain points that they have to deal with on a regular basis.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's sort of thinking about it on two levels.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think within Powder itself, we've got a bunch of tools that help kind of follow and set expectations, right? So things that people can actually use to get that kind of consistency and be able to meet the expectations. So let's say, for instance, you've got a no-show policy, late cancellation policy. And in the manual, you've got the details of the script and a process that says when that's happened, send them the invoice. So say with Pado, you could go in there and you could say, initially maybe they got an online form to sign that said what would happen, like that if you late show, you'll be sent an invoice and be asked to pay prior to your next appointment, right? So you've got that it's in the policy. You've now sent it out online form that they've agreed to, right? Then you've got the script when the person rings up and cancels late. Okay. So now we've got to send that invoice. Now, if you left that to the end of the month, or you did, or you had or you didn't have like Powder that allows you to do it,
Right.
the connection like that may not happen. It might happen late. The person may have forgotten what it's for when it does arrive. So instead, you can have a template within Powder that says, okay, this is what this one is, right? This is
Exactly.
a thing. Here's the invoice. And then the invoice can contain a link for online payment, right? So we ask them to pay it prior to the next appointment. You've got a link in there that allows them to pay that invoice, and they get taken straight to Stripe, for instance, and they get in the credit card details, and securely pay and have that all resolved. So the expectations being set.
Yes.
The script is there. They follow the process and send it out. The same with things like waiting lists. What's going to happen? Like, okay, I'm on the wait list. Well, what does that mean? Now, if a practice isn't using a formal waiting list, right, then anything could happen. They may be written on someone's sheet of paper. It may, who knows, right? It may not even get written down. Some people might just say, okay, we have waiting list, and not even have that because they think, well, it's so full, the odds of you making it, right? We've seen all sorts of things, right, over the years. And so by having, like, say in Powder, a waitlist feature that allows you to put notes in, record when the person is and isn't available, and so forth. If you set an expectation to say, if an appointment becomes available, we'll contact you. Well, Powder is going to support that, because when you have someone cancels an appointment, you can set it so that Powder will look at that wait list and tell you which people match the criteria that could fit that appointment. And you can see how long they've been waiting too, so you can keep the prioritization correct. So you can kind of set an expectation, then use tools in a practice management system, to kind of follow through on that and make sure, again, that you've got a consistent approach and that you're proactively setting up all these things even before they happen.
Mm-hmm. And that really makes the life of your team members so much easier, right? And it's
Yeah,
better for your customers, it's better for the team. It's just
yeah,
makes everything run so much more smoothly.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of our, so Fiona, who heads up marketing and strategy here, as you know, Powder, she has a sort of view, or a sort of saying that, like, if you are likely to have to write something more than once, or deliver a message more than once, right?
Okay.
Then there should be a template for it, right?
Right. Yes.
There should be a process for it, right? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it's so easy to overlook that and think, oh, and you have people that that have these things that come up, these scenarios that come up, and there's no documented way, right, of them being managed. So the learnings from previous encounters. So what if a patient rings up and says they're sick, right? what if they ring up and they say, I've got to work at another job, right? So for the different reasons, I was going to say excuses, but I'll say reasons that people can't, right? If you're going to have to tailor your response slightly differently for those things, it's predictable that that's going to happen more than once, right?
Right.
So instead of that person at admin having to kind of think on their feet and come up right with something on the spot, by preempting, being proactive, and capturing those things, then you can get that kind of get that consistency, get the efficiency of learning and from those previous experiences.
Exactly. And I was going to say that too, like we said before about that consistency, the language and getting that same response. So important.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into the final mistake, which is
final mistakes. Okay.
Yes, number 5, not owning up to a problem.
Right. You have to acknowledge the issue,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think that's a big mistake, is that instinctively you want to defend, or most people want to defend rather than just acknowledging and apologizing, and apologizing for the mistakes made. That's one thing that I like to work with on team members and tell my team members. It's important to say you're sorry when it's appropriate. It's you have to acknowledge if there's an issue. You have to have that empathy. You have to have the correct response. You have to listen to understand. So this all goes together. And getting an answer to the problem is important, but sometimes acknowledging the issue is more important.
Yeah.
Because if you just respond with, "Oh yeah, we're working on it," that's not enough. You have to really acknowledge that the issue is there.
Yeah. And like I said, linking back to empathy, understanding genuinely the impact that might have had. So in a practice, let's say a practitioner was sick, for a day, and they need to have their appointments cancelled, so their patients have been, inconvenienced. Now, in this sort of scenario, like, you can take it 2 different ways depending on the person. You can sort of go into it with the mindset, well, practitioners are human, and they need to have occasionally have days off too. And they just, they come in and sort of almost like defensively, because when a patient pushes back and gets upset and say, well, I've waited for X amount of time, right, for this appointment, and now you're cancelling on the morning, right? How you approach that is very different. If you take the view of, which is factually correct, practitioners are human, they're going to get sick, you're going to have like cancellations, right? Like on the practitioner side. Okay. But if that's the mindset, and then, you don't kind of acknowledge, or you don't own up, or you don't acknowledge that impact for the patient, the experience is hugely different, isn't it?
Right.
Like,
that's right.
Yeah. And it's that, and in this sort of scenario, even like, when you're sort of acknowledging, to say, look, that you understand the impact. I'm really sorry this has like happened. It's unfortunate. Maybe it's happened twice in a row. A practitioner may have a recurrent health problem, get sick again a short time later, right? And, acknowledging those things, right? It doesn't mean in any way selling out the practitioner or the business. It doesn't mean just capitulating and saying, and being, too far the other way, but just being factually correct and honest about, hey, yeah, this is really unfortunate. Or if they were late in being notified, to say, recognize that, hey, realize that we didn't let you know until X amount of time before, right? Working on this is what happened, fell through the crack. Might be just explain it, right? But acknowledging it, right? It just shifts the way in which the person communicates, the patient that is, or the customer communicates, because it's now, okay, you understand the issue. I don't need to convince you of that anymore. And then you get into the more substantive part. Okay, number 2, take ownership. What are we talking about here?
Well, that flows with what you're saying as well. So from a team member perspective, you have to take ownership of the problem that the customer is having. So if you acknowledge the issue and respond, if you say you're going to let them know when the next appointment is available, if you're going to tell them what the resolution is, or you let them know that as soon as there is a resolution, you're going to let them know. You
Yeah.
have to follow through. You have to take ownership of it.
Yeah.
So in our world, it may be, one specific response. If you're waiting for a customer to reply to an
Yeah.
email, to be sure that you take ownership of that and follow through so that they're communicating with the same person if possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to take ownership, but really understanding that it's your responsibility to solve this problem for this person
Yeah.
all the way through to the end.
Yeah.
And most of the time that's with communication, making sure
Yeah.
that you're communicating and following through.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a contrast to say, I'll get back to you this afternoon. I'll check on that for you and get back to you this afternoon. Right. Then we'll look into that and someone will get back to you.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
On the receiving end, I know, like, I think I was telling you when we were preparing for this, this webinar that, had an issue with a bank recently. And every time I'd contact, they would tell me someone would follow up, and no one ever
Right.
did.
Yeah.
No one ever. And then eventually, I think my wife might have got hold of a person who actually took ownership and said, "This is really, like, what's happening is really weird. I can't understand it either. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to ask our technical people why this isn't, like, functioning the way it should in this particular account or something." Right? And he, even though he couldn't answer, he actually followed through, and he would ring sometimes twice a day to update, like, this is
Oh,
what's
wow.
happened. Even if there was no update, to say, "Hey, I've spoken to these people. We don't think it's that. So what we're going to do tomorrow is try this." Right.
Right.
But just that update that there's something happening, and he's taking ownership of that. It was such a relief, like,
Right,
yeah, because someone is actually, taking ownership and saying, "Yeah, this is weird. It's not right. We're going to figure out what's happening and fix it." Where literally for months we would have had someone, "Oh, that's been elevated." Someone from technical will get back to you. Someone from this will get back to you. And you just think nothing's happening.
Well,
So
and you can tell too. I mean, with that experience that you had with the bank, you can tell if someone is taking ownership, whether
yeah,
it be on the phone or
yeah,
through written communication. If you get that, excuse me, blanket response, you know that they're not really owning it, right?
yeah, yeah,
So if you're on the phone with a customer, with a patient, you can tell if someone is taking the time to understand and potentially write the information down, take
yeah,
notes take notes in the computer, whatever they're doing. But if someone is responding correctly
yeah,
as the customer.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah. You do that. Yeah, you can feel it. It's a different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
And
think
that's training as well, right?
yeah,
To train your team to respond in a way that the customer understands
yeah,
that you're listening and that you are taking ownership.
yeah,
Because even if you are taking ownership and you're taking all the steps that you're supposed to on this end, on the
yeah,
customer end, excuse me, on the customer service end, they don't know it.
yeah,
So you have to communicate exactly what you're doing, what you're going to do
yes,
with your follow up, and then actually follow through with
yeah,
following up and
yeah,
communicating.
yeah.
And that's going to help with retention, and that's going to help with referrals. It all goes together.
Goes together. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think too, the other uh, component to this is that I think most health practitioners, like, intuitively know, like, how to communicate empathy, I guess, of course, but, like, also how to communicate that idea of kind of ownership and next steps and that engagement. Like, most health practitioners are pretty good at engagement, probably a better way to put it. But that's often a whole combination of micro skills, right, that are being utilized, not necessarily to the person's awareness, like conscious awareness, but it's being utilized that gets that effect. But then when the practitioner hires an admin person, they often will make assumptions, like we were saying before, that how to be engaging or
Mhm.
how to communicate that I'm taking ownership, I'm taking it seriously, what those micro skills are. And I think they forget, it's one of the reasons that they forget to train or don't train. So let's say taking ownership, I'm going to do the follow-up. If I know someone is writing down, like, the important elements of what I'm saying, right, then I know, right, that I'm being listened to. And so for for in an admin point of view, from a a practice, like they're dealing with a patient, right? If they say, okay, I'm just going to take a note of the availability you told me. So that was Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays in the morning. Is that right? I'm just going to put a note of that in. I'm just going to put a note of that on our waitlist system, right?
Right.
So that commentary about what you're doing, the actions, the little things that you're doing to illustrate that. I'd say that if we went to 99% of practitioners, they're going to do that. If we were to sort of like secretly film them and see what they actually do, they're probably going to do those things and not even know that that's what they're doing. But
Right.
remembering to train the admin people to say, hey, exactly like what you said, if you're going to do these things, tell them what you're doing, even
Yeah.
in real time. And it just shifts the whole sort of perception that there is acknowledgement if there's an issue, and they're taking ownership and specific action around that. So that's very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put this all together. We are nearly finished. So bringing us around full circle here, what does it take to sustain a powerful customer service, either team, or it might be to keep a really good person if you've got one person in your one admin person in your practice? Okay, what things make a difference here in sustaining those people?
Well, I think that we've touched on it so much, going back to these mistakes and how, we're talking through the team members and listening to understand and everything that we've gone through. So really, you have to give your team members the same respect that you give your customers, that you give your clients. And we have been speaking to that throughout this whole presentation, but it's very important that your team members feel valued, that they get that training, that they're empowered, and you have to have a balance with everything, right? So we talked about empathy. So hire people with empathy, but then you also have to have that same empathy for the team member. You want your team member to give empathy to the customers, then you need to have empathy for them. And we talk about growth a lot here at Power Diary, and empowering the team members to grow within the organization, to grow their skills. And that might not always be the case. You might only have one person working in admin, and you can still grow that person. You can grow their skill set. You can be encouraging. You can teach them new skills. And a lot of times this training is empowering, as you increase their communication skills. If they really feel valued in the practice, which they are, obviously, as we said before, they're the face, they're the voice, they're the writing, that you have to build them up and help them grow.
And it's there's some pretty good research out there too that talks about retention of good team members, that sense of like growth, like development in their skill set is one of the things that is makes a difference. And it can be just about how you allocate responsibilities as well, right? Like that it might be someone that starts as an admin person with fairly traditional kind of admin skills, but if you notice that they've got an aptitude or an interest in a particular area, then giving people the opportunity to kind of grow into some different functions and different elements of the role allows you to sort of achieve that without it. It may not be like a formal like promotion as such, but it's sort of understanding like where does this person, what are they interested in, where do they want to go with their career or personally or professionally, and then supporting that in the way that you can, within your context. And over the years, like I've sort of never stopped being surprised, like that when you give people like the space and you give them opportunities that might be outside their normal kind of wheelhouse, like that how much capacity people have, to do things that are different. And I think we're talking briefly before, but I've often given responsibilities and things to admin people, say in a health practice, and the way that they've run with it and developed something that is amazing, and develop partnerships with major companies and things, that because allowing them to kind of do more and explore a different element to what their traditional role might have been, you really do get a win all round, and it's great for retention of that team member too, because they feel like they're definitely progressing, they're developing new skills, they're being valued as a person.
And it's very important to have that retention, because if your customers is able to communicate with the same team member for years,
Yeah.
they really see that they're passionate and that they're involved in the care
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just when I look at parallels between our practice, which was really fun and really great, and like when we had a great team, and then I look at the same with Power Diary, like what are the one of the commonalities there, just trying to learn about what works, what doesn't, in business. But one of the commonalities in both businesses that where I've had this level of involvement, that one commonality is the length of tenure of our team members. Like, we would have really would build good, like get the right people in the roles, and over time that you grow that team, and you get like a collection of really kind of great people that really become the heart and soul of the organization.
Yeah.
And if you get it right, you retain the right people.
Well, I'm not
as
going
well.
anywhere, so you'll have me around for a while.
Very good. It's nice to get public reassurance of that. Okay, let's wrap things up. So going to our the final slide here on if people need any help with Power Diary or anything else, we've got some contact information here that you can contact our support team, email. You can book live one-on-one video calls. There's live chat we have left off the slide by accident, but we have live chat available either on our main website, or if you're within the app, you can activate live chat in there as well. And we have almost 24/7 covered with chat. There's always someone not far away. So if there is anything that we can sort of help with, then please do let us know. Having attended this webinar, we'll send you out an email following up from that, and we'll include in that a link to a blog that we did a while ago on some different elements of customer service. We wanted to kind of really drill down today on these sort of core mistakes that we kind of see, and also there's a customer service PDF with some reminders of some key things on that too. So look out for that in the email that you will get following your attendance at this webinar. Diana, thank you very much for co-hosting today. It's been great to go through this with you and share your experience and your perspective, and that it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
Thanks. All right, bye everyone. Bye.
Bye.